Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and today I want to talk about the movie Cutthroat Island, which came out in 1995, and for some reason it was a huge box office flop, and is even considered to be a very bad movie by reviewers, which I don't agree with. I think it's an underrated movie, and I remember seeing it on TV as a small kid, and I absolutely loved this movie back then. Recently I rewatched it, and I still think it's a good movie. I do see all the flaws now, I do realize why some people dislike it, but I still think it's an overall okay and maybe even a good movie. And a lot of the flaws of this movie I can easily forgive because it's basically a comedy movie. It's an action comedy popcorn flick, and so that's why I can forgive a lot of the mistakes, like the rules of physics not making sense in all the crazy action scenes. But I can forgive all of that because the movie doesn't take itself that seriously. If it was a serious movie which tries to show something realistically and does all that kind of stupid stuff, then I would say I would complain about that. But since the movie is comedic, then that makes it forgivable. And a lot of the stupid stuff actually makes it more fun. Like, the over-exaggerated action scenes, like everything blows up to such an exaggerated level, that does make it more fun. And so I kind of prefer it this way even. If it was more realistic looking, then it would be more boring. They fire cannons and yet they explode as if you launched a mini nuke at something. And so obviously it's exaggerated, obviously it's not realistic, but it does make it more fun as well. And so that's why I personally do enjoy this movie. And I tried to watch someone else's review on YouTube on this movie to understand what exactly people dislike about it, and I didn't even finish that video because it annoyed me too much, because I kind of disagree with most of his points. He was nitpicking the movie to a level which even I call myself a nitpicking nerd, I wouldn't do, especially as I said, as a comedy movie. So you really would be complaining about, how was he able to catch her when she was falling so quickly, his arm would have been pulled from its socket. Come on, this kind of stuff exists in all action movies of the 90s and 80s. There's always that kind of unrealistic stuff, and so I found it kind of an annoying review, and I disagree with it. And also one of his biggest points against the movie was the fact that the main character was a woman and she became the captain of the pirates, and no one even mentions that she's a woman, and so it's never a problem for her, and that this is totally unrealistic. And so I kind of rolled my eyes at that, because again, it's kind of a comedy movie, and that's kind of what makes this movie more unique and more interesting in my opinion. Now, of course, it would have been maybe even better if they did raise this issue in the movie itself, so maybe it could have all been done much better, but I don't really see a big problem with it. And I don't think this is a Mary Sue situation, which is something I myself was complaining about in my reviews of other more recent movies about the whole Mary Sue issue. And there are some elements of it here, but I don't think it's that bad here. I think here it's not as annoying because it's not as stupid, and I will explain in detail. One of the problems with the Mary Sue is that it's simply unrealistic the way it's shown. It's illogical in how it works, like cannot accept it. And yet here it's not the same exact thing, because they show us that she basically grew up with the pirates. Her father was the previous captain of the ship, and she was a pirate for many years. She was famous when she went to the city. We see posters of her being wanted, and people recognize her, and they all heard about her. So obviously she's been a pirate for many years, and probably since childhood. So she grew up with these pirates, and they all know her. And so that's why that scene when she takes command does make sense in my opinion, because they all know her, they all know that she's a badass, and a lot of them are loyal to her, and so it's not that unbelievable. What would have made it an annoying Mary Sue situation is if she didn't start out as a pirate, if she was the daughter of the governor or something like that, if she came from the civilized society and would have joined the pirates and became the leader of the pirates in one day and would know how to do everything right away without explanation, then that would be illogical and stupid and annoying and unrealistic to a level which is unacceptable in my opinion. But this is not the situation here, and so that's why I did not find that element as annoying here, even though she does have some plot armor, she is a little bit overpowered, but not to that extent that annoys me too much. And there is some team effort in this movie. She does have her crew, she does have her loyalists who help her out, she doesn't do everything by herself. It's more of a team effort, while in the Mary Sue movies, it's always the Mary Sue who does everything by herself, and all the other ones are just amazed at her and are just in her way, basically. So this is not the situation here. Here we had a lot of scenes in which she needed the help of her friends and that sidekick guy and her crew and the team she had, and so it was more of a team effort, and she was not just know it all and does it all by herself. For example, she didn't know the Latin language, that's why she had to get that guy Mr. Shaw because he did know Latin and she didn't. But if she was a Mary Sue, then she would know all the languages by herself. She wouldn't need anyone's help at all. So that's why I disagree with the claim that this is kind of the same kind of over-exaggerated feminist movie, and so I disagree with that. Even though it does have some of those elements, but those elements always existed in silly action movies of the main hero being invincible. You know, there's one scene when she gets shot with a bullet and it doesn't seem to affect her for a long while. She continues fighting and everything, only later she faints, but you know, she does faint. She does need someone to do the surgery on her to remove the bullet, so she's not totally invincible, she is vulnerable. While if it was a Mary Sue, then she would do the surgery on herself, she wouldn't need anyone's help, and so that would be annoying and stupid. And so it's not the case here. And also this movie isn't afraid to show off her sexy body and use her femininity. There are some scenes when she shows off, you know, parts of her body in a sexy way, and you know, I saw it as a teenager and I fondly remember those scenes as really eye-opening scenes, like So I personally don't have a problem with that, and I think it makes it more fun. So the main hero is very sexy to my eyes, and so what's wrong with that? And so that's another difference from today's Mary Sue movies, which don't really do that. I guess they would be against the idea of objectifying a woman's body for the sake of ratings, and so they never do that. And so, for example, Rey in the new Star Wars movies, there's not a single scene in the whole new trilogy of her being sexy or showing off some skin or something, nothing. She's a totally almost genderless character in the whole trilogy. And maybe it's because of this extreme feminism that, oh no, we cannot show her being sexy because then it would be objectifying her body or something. So, unlike in the older Star Wars movies when they had, you know, scenes of Leia being dressed in a gold bikini and all of that, which I think a lot of teenage boys who saw that probably loved that stuff. And it enhanced their enjoyment of that movie, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Just like in all those male action heroes, when the main hero is a man who takes off his shirt before a fight, you know, like Van Damme and all those kind of actors who are really muscular, and they were often showing it off. So I can say, okay, those movies were objectifying those men, and it's wrong, and so we shouldn't be doing that. I think that's a stupid way to do movies. Like, what's the point of hiring a sexy young beautiful actor or actress and not showing it off, not using that? So why not? Like, I don't really see anything wrong with that. So anyway, this movie was not afraid to do that, and there are a lot of scenes of her being sexy and showing off some skin, you know, some legs, there was a shot when someone does a search on her, and all those parts, in my opinion, are nice. I don't mind seeing that in movies, and so why not? And yet today's movies wouldn't do that. So anyway, that's why I don't really have any big problem with the main lead in this movie. Some people say she's a bad actress. I don't really see why. Like, I guess she could be better, but she's not awful at all. There are some good scenes, I think, and some people complain that her accent isn't right and something. Now, I'm not an American and I'm not British, and so maybe I'm just not noticing all the accent problems, but you know, the character is a pirate. Grew up at sea with a bunch of pirates and they were going all over from country to country, so maybe it would make sense for her to pick up different accents and not have a correct accent. So it might actually fit the character, because again, she didn't just become a pirate in one day, she was a pirate from birth basically, and they're going all over the place and not in any one country, so it would make sense for her to have a strange accent, and so I don't have any problem with that. And even though there were some times in which maybe she was a little bit overpowered, but it wasn't more than the usual action hero of the 90s and 80s movies, which always were like that. They were always more invincible than a real person, and so it's the same thing, so I'm not going to complain about it just because she's a woman. And even though it's all a little bit unrealistic, you know, in that time period that a woman would be accepted as a leader, so you can argue about that, but because the movie is comedic, I'm fine with that as well, and I actually like this in the movie. And there were some funny scenes in which she had to dress up as a lady to try to get into the city, and so it was like a fish out of water situation in which she had to pretend to be civilized when she's not, and all kinds of situations like that, which I thought were neat. It wasn't as funny as it could have been, and maybe that's one of the biggest problems of this movie, is that a lot of the jokes are just not really that funny. And I guess it also depends on your age. As I said, I saw it as a kid and I did find a lot of them funny, and even now I do think some of them are fine, even if it's not laugh out loud funny, but it can give you a smile and so on. So I don't actually mind a lot of things in this movie, and you know, the monkey was kind of funny. And even the villains were kind of funny, and the villain is probably the strongest thing about this movie. The guy who played Douglas, the evil uncle of Morgan, and I thought he was a great villain, and I mostly like the fact that he was a clever villain, that every time someone tries to trick him somehow, he always springs the trap, he always knows exactly what is going on, almost as if he has telepathy in some parts of the movie, but I can explain it away by him being just so clever that he can see the moves of his enemies, and also he did have some sense of humor, and he had a very cool sword. He had the kind of a serrated sword which looked really good, and so I actually really liked the villain in this movie, and there were some side villains as well, which unfortunately were kind of killed off too easily in the end. I mean, there was that fat traitor guy who betrayed Morgan, there was the guy on the ship who betrayed her, I think Scully was his name or something, the guy who mutinied against her, and there was that snobbish rich guy, and all of those guys kind of died easily just in the final battle. They just got hit by something and they died, and so there was no personal confrontation with any of them, so that was kind of a missed opportunity of the movie kind of wrapping itself up too quickly. And also so that guy called Trotter just switched sides in the end with no explanation. I guess he was constantly berated by his boss, but his boss was now dead, and suddenly he switched to the side of the good pirates. There was no setup for it, and so that was a little bit strange. A lot of things were kind of too rushed in this movie or underdeveloped, and there was also that Wesley Crusher type of kid character on the ship of pirates, who I guess they adopted, and he just becomes a pirate from childhood, and so he's just with them, and yet the movie never really explores his backstory, his character, so we know nothing about him, and at some point I even thought he was mute, that he cannot talk, but then later he does talk, and so he was kind of an odd character. But at least this movie does have a lot of variety of characters. Like, I can remember a lot of them because they had some unique things about them, and some of the bad guys, like one henchman was wearing some kind of chain on his arm which he always used in battle, and so he appeared throughout the movie, and I remembered him from before. And then also there was like an ironic death scene when his chain also killed him in the end, and so a lot of little details which I liked. There was a lot of attention, a lot of characters that they tried to make memorable, like each of them had something unique about them. There was that guy with the tattoos on his face which was super loyal to Morgan, and it was kind of funny how every time she has to make a decision, she has to consult with him, she has to kind of ask his permission every time. It happened about 5 times in the movie, that constantly she asks him if he agrees, and only if he agrees she will do it, and so that was kind of almost repetitive humor. It became kind of funny to me. And there was the black guy who fought people with a hammer, he was kind of cool, and so there were actually a lot of neat characters that were kind of underdeveloped, and so there was a lot of potential there, but the movie didn't really develop them enough, and that's why it's far from a perfect movie. And as for the main character, what I think was missing and what could have made it truly great is if they showed that she does have vulnerabilities and fears that she has to overcome. That would have made the character much more realistic and much more sympathetic, and you know, she could have been like Sarah Connor or Ripley in Aliens, which are my favorite examples of a strong female character. And it wasn't just because they were badasses, it was mostly because both of them did have fears, they did have difficulties, they had PTSDs after going through a lot of crazy stuff. They were not just totally okay after that. They were kind of broken, they were kind of terrified of it, and yet they managed to face their fears and defeat it later. And so that to me is what makes those characters truly heroic. It's not because they didn't have any fear at any point at all, but rather they did have the fear, but they managed to overcome that fear. And that to me is true heroism. And that also makes them more human. We can relate to them, we can sympathize with them, and then we can cheer for them when they succeed and win in the end. And so I wish they would have added something like that to this movie, show more difficulty for the main character, show that she's not invincible, that she's not totally fearless, that she does have fear but overcomes it. And so if they did that, it would have been much better, but instead she's just totally fearless throughout the movie. So it does have that Mary Sue element to it, but it wasn't as bad as the more recent examples in new movies, as I explained, and so that's why I think it's kind of passable. So I still can enjoy this movie despite all its flaws, and it didn't really feel boring to me at any point. The special effects I think were great, the music was great, all the set pieces, all the ships, all that stuff actually looked really good, and of course a lot of it was kind of over exaggerated, but all of it was done in a fun way which I can forgive. And there was even that scene when the bad guy took that eel fish to try to scare people, to torture people with, and the fish looked like a monster. It didn't actually look like an actual eel, but it looked more like a xenomorph, and it was kind of making sounds, and it was trying to bite people, and it was like a monster. So that wasn't realistic, because that animal is not as vicious and dangerous as they showed it, but it did make that scene much cooler, and it made the villain look cooler because he wasn't scared to grab that thing and to scare other people with it, and so that made the villain also much more badass. So all those places in the movie in which they exaggerated things, I thought was actually good. So all the big explosions, the fireballs, all of that stuff was actually good. The only time I didn't like it was when they killed off all the minor villains just by explosions. None of them really got a satisfying conclusion. They were just killed off in explosions easily, and so there was no drama, there was no personal interactions either with the heroes, or maybe even if the villain would have killed them, if the main villain would have killed those minor villains, that at least would also be kind of satisfying. And yet it just all died in the battle, and that's it. So that was kind of a too convenient, easy wrap-up for all those side characters, and so a lot of things in this movie could have been done much better, but at least the movie didn't forget about all of those things, and so there was some attention to detail, and so it's not as annoying as some modern movies. And if I compare it with movies like Pirates of the Caribbean, I think it kind of comes close to it. It's not as funny as that movie, and it also doesn't have all those fantasy elements which made those movies more interesting. But in terms of just silly action scenes and funny situations, it comes pretty close, even though it wasn't as funny as it. And so, you know, Jack Sparrow was much more funny than any character in this movie, and so Pirates of the Caribbean is better overall, but this movie is not that far behind in my humble opinion, and I think it's underrated. I think some of the people who reviewed it were kind of too harsh on it, and I would even recommend it for people who just want to watch a silly pirate movie. And if you're a fan of Pirates of the Caribbean, I think you probably would enjoy this movie as well, even though it's not as good, but it's kind of close in my opinion. And speaking of pirate movies in general, I kind of thought about it when watching this one, is that it's kind of funny to me how all of these movies kind of romanticize all the pirates as if they are the heroes, and all the civilized people are always portrayed as kind of annoying, snobbish, evil rich people, which I guess is necessary in order to make the pirates look like the heroes of the movie. But I think we do have to remember that in reality the pirates were actually the bad guys. They were the criminals, they were the thieves, they were the plunderers and rapists and all of that, while the civilized people were more educated and probably less violent and all of that. And so historically speaking, all of these kinds of movies are not really accurate, and usually they have kind of a more evil pirate fighting against the less evil pirates, so that they will look like the heroes of the movie. And they always show that all those rich governors, they are all corrupt and they're evil, and they're only thinking about money and how to make money, and they're willing to make dirty deals with the pirates. And so it kind of always this kind of setup. And also the hero pirates often just look for a treasure, because that way they don't have to kill anyone or steal from anyone. So it's always some kind of ancient treasure by people who are no longer alive. And this way the hero pirates don't really steal from anyone living, and they don't really attack any innocent people. They're just looking for a treasure, and so that can make them more sympathetic heroes of a movie compared to if they were actually hurting and robbing innocent people. And I guess it's all okay for the sake of entertainment, because there is something cool about pirates and all of that, so I'm okay with that. It's just something I wanted to mention because it kind of occurred to me when I watched this movie that, you know, in reality maybe we would be siding with the other side against the pirates. And it's a big discussion for another time, but this movie specifically, in my personal opinion, is a fun popcorn movie, and I don't understand the hate toward it. I can understand people not liking it and saying it's not as good as it could have been or should have been, but I don't share the hate toward it, and I enjoy a lot of things in it. And so that's my opinion. Let me know what you think, and we can discuss it in the comment section below, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.